"I will be their father," echoed through the valleys, as one man's declaration became the salvation for a desperate family. The mountain man stood tall against injustice, refusing to let cruelty win when a widow faced brutal punishment simply for bringing twin girls into this world. Before we begin, make sure to subscribe to the channel and comment where you're watching from. The morning air in Willow Creek Village hung heavy with judgment as Maria Johnson lay curled in the dirt, her newborn twin girls whimpering at her side. The crowd that had gathered to witness her shame now dispersed, leaving only whispers and sideways glances in their wake. Every ache in her battered body echoed the villagers' cruel voices, branding her a failure for not producing a son. Maria's tears mingled with the dust beneath her cheek. Just 3 days ago, she had given birth alone in her small hut at the edge of the village. The joy of her daughter's first cries had quickly turned to dread when the midwife's face darkened at the sight of not one, but 2 baby girls. In Willow Creek, twins were considered an ill omen, and female twins doubly so. "Cursed," the village elder had pronounced, his weathered finger pointing accusingly at her swaddled infants. "You have brought shame upon us all." The young mother's fingers trembled as she reached out to stroke her daughter's downy heads. They were so small, so perfect. How could anyone see them as a curse? The bruises on her arms and back throbbed with each shallow breath she took. The village men had dragged her from her home at dawn, forcing her to kneel before the elders for judgment. When she refused to abandon her children, fists and sticks had followed. From the dense forest that bordered the village clearing, Robert Smith watched the scene unfold, his jaw clenched with silent fury. Known to the villagers only as the Mountain Man, he had built his solitary existence away from their superstitions and cruelty. His massive frame remained hidden among the trees, but his keen eyes missed nothing. Robert had always kept his distance from village politics, trading occasionally for supplies, but never lingering. The people feared him as much as they needed the pelts and meat he provided. Yet witnessing Maria's suffering ignited something fierce within him, a protective instinct he thought had died years ago. He recognized the young woman. She had always been kind during his infrequent visits to trade, offering him fresh bread when others would barely meet his gaze. Now she lay broken in the dirt, her newborns crying weakly beside her, abandoned by everyone she had once called neighbor. The mountain man's scarred hands gripped the trunk of an ancient oak as he considered what to do. Interfering meant ending his carefully maintained isolation. Yet something about the mother's desperate courage as she shielded her daughters with her own body spoke to a long-buried part of his soul. Robert took a deep breath. He had survived alone in these mountains for 15 years. But some injustices demanded action, no matter the cost. Robert Smith strode into the village square, his broad frame casting a long shadow that silenced even the loudest gossip. The whispers died instantly as villagers recognized the Mountain Man, a figure they spoke of in hushed tones, whose presence in town was as rare as snow in summer. His weathered face remained stoic, but his eyes burned with quiet fury as he surveyed the scene before him. Maria Johnson lay curled in the dirt, her body trembling from the abuse she'd endured. Beside her, 2 tiny bundles emitted soft whimpers, twin girls whose only crime was being born female in a place that valued sons. Blood trickled from a cut on Maria's lip, and bruises were already forming on her exposed arms. Without hesitation, Robert knelt beside the young mother, his movements surprisingly gentle for a man of his size. The villagers watched, frozen in place, as he carefully assessed her injuries with calloused hands that had survived decades in the wilderness. "Can you stand?" he asked softly, his voice rough from disuse. Maria nodded weakly, clutching her daughters closer to her chest. The Mountain Man supported her with one strong arm while gathering the twins with his other. The infants seemed impossibly small against his massive frame. yet he handled them with the delicacy one might show a pair of fragile birds. Elder Thompson stepped forward, his walking stick thumping against the hard-packed earth. "This is village business," he declared, though his voice wavered. "The woman has brought shame." "Shame?" Robert interrupted, the single word cutting through the air like a blade. "The only shame here belongs to those who would harm a mother and her children." The crowd shifted uncomfortably, some averting their eyes, while others stared in defiance. Robert rose to his full height, cradling Maria and her daughters protectively. His gaze swept across the gathered faces, neighbors who had turned against one of their own, friends who had become tormentors. "I will be their father," he declared, the words ringing out across the square with unwavering conviction. The statement hung in the air, simple yet profound. No one moved to stop him as he turned away from the stunned villagers. Maria's tears soaked into his worn shirt as he carried her and the twins toward the forest path. Behind them, murmurs began to ripple through the crowd, but Robert paid them no mind. His focus remained entirely on the three vulnerable lives now in his care. As they reached the edge of the village, Maria whispered, "Why?" The mountain man's pace never faltered as he replied, "Because it's the right thing to do." The forest welcomed them with rustling leaves and dappled sunlight, offering shelter from the cruelty they left behind. The forest enveloped Maria Johnson and her newborn twins like a protective cloak, the dense canopy filtering sunlight into gentle, dappled patterns on the forest floor. Behind them, the angry voices of Willow Creek Village faded with each step, replaced by the whisper of wind through leaves and the occasional call of birds. Maria clutched her daughters tighter against her chest, their tiny bodies warm against her bruised skin. Her legs trembled with exhaustion and fear, but she forced herself to keep moving, following the broad shoulders of Robert Smith as he led the way. "Just a bit further," the mountain man reassured her, his voice surprisingly gentle for someone of his imposing stature. He slowed his pace when he noticed her struggling, offering a weathered hand to steady her as they navigated the winding path that climbed steadily upward. The trail eventually opened to a small clearing where Robert's cabin stood, sturdy and unassuming against the backdrop of towering pines. Maria hesitated at the threshold, uncertainty washing over her face. What if this sanctuary proved to be another kind of prison? "You and your daughters are safe here," Robert said, reading her apprehension. He pushed open the wooden door, revealing the warm interior of his home. The cabin's simplicity struck Maria immediately, one main room with a small adjoining space, but meticulously organized. A fire crackled in a stone hearth, casting dancing shadows across rough-hewn walls. Shelves lined with preserved foods, dried herbs, and essential supplies spoke of careful preparation and self-sufficiency. In one corner, she noticed a bed covered with several handmade quilts, and nearby, a rocking chair positioned perfectly to catch the warmth of the fire. "You can rest here," he said, gesturing toward the bed. "I'll prepare something for you to eat." Maria sank onto the edge of the mattress, her body finally acknowledging the toll of the past days. The twins, exhausted from their ordeal, had fallen into fitful sleep. She laid them gently on the blankets, arranging them so they faced each other as they had in her womb. As Robert moved about the cabin, heating broth over the fire and gathering clean cloths, Maria's eyes took in every detail of this unexpected refuge. Bundles of dried plants hung from the rafters, medicinal herbs, she guessed. Hand-carved wooden utensils and bowls spoke of long winter evenings spent in solitary creation. The warmth of the cabin seemed to seep into her bones, thawing something frozen inside her. This place wasn't the crude shelter of a wild man that village rumors had described. It was a home, carefully tended and thoughtfully arranged. For the first time since giving birth, Maria allowed her shoulders to relax slightly. Perhaps here, in this unexpected haven, she and her daughters might find more than just escape. They might find peace. Robert Smith's hands, calloused and weathered from years of wilderness survival, moved with unexpected gentleness as he cleaned Maria Johnson's wounds. The contrast between his rough exterior and tender care wasn't lost on Maria, who watched him with wary gratitude as he applied herbal salves to the bruises that marked her arms and face. "These should help with the swelling," he said softly, his voice a low rumble that somehow didn't disturb the sleeping infants nearby. "The villagers, they did this because of your daughters?" Maria nodded, wincing as he touched a particularly sensitive spot on her cheek. "Twin girls are considered bad luck in Willow Creek. They wanted sons, strong boys to work the fields." Her voice trembled. "When the midwife announced 2 daughters instead, my husband's family turned against me. After he died last winter, there was no one left to protect us." The mountain man's jaw tightened, but his hands remained gentle as he finished tending to her injuries. He moved to examine the twins, his large fingers becoming impossibly delicate as he checked each infant for signs of distress or injury. "They're hungry but otherwise healthy," he assessed, wrapping them in soft deerskin blankets he'd pulled from a wooden chest. "Strong little ones." Robert moved to the hearth, where a pot of broth simmered. The cabin, though modest, was well organized. Shelves stocked with preserved foods, medicinal herbs hanging from the rafters, and furs neatly arranged for warmth. He ladled the steaming liquid into a wooden bowl and brought it to Maria. "Eat," he encouraged. "You need strength to feed them." The broth was rich with forest mushrooms and wild onions, warming Maria from within. She couldn't remember the last time someone had cared for her needs. In the village, she'd been relegated to the margins, even before giving birth. A widow with no standing, expected to accept whatever scraps of kindness came her way. As the fire crackled and cast dancing shadows across the cabin walls, exhaustion began to claim her. The twins slept peacefully nearby, their tiny chests rising and falling in perfect rhythm. Safety, or something close to it, wrapped around her like the blanket Robert had draped over her shoulders. "Why are you doing this?" Maria whispered, fighting to keep her eyes open. "You don't know me. You don't owe us anything." Robert paused in his work of banking the fire for the night. His eyes, reflecting the golden flames, held a depth of understanding that took her breath away. "Because no one should be punished for bringing life into the world," he said simply. "Especially not life as precious as theirs." For the first time in days, perhaps longer, Maria allowed herself a glimmer of hope. As sleep finally claimed her, she wondered if perhaps they had found not just shelter, but a home. The twins' hungry cries pierced the night, growing more desperate with each passing minute. Maria Johnson rocked them gently, her face etched with worry as they struggled to latch properly. Her own body, still recovering from the village's cruelty, seemed to be failing her daughters when they needed her most. "They're too weak," she whispered, panic rising in her voice. "I don't know what to do." Robert Smith moved with surprising grace for such a large man. Without a word, he reached for a worn leather pouch tucked behind some jars on a shelf. His hands, calloused from years in the wilderness, worked methodically as he mixed dried herbs with water in a small pot over the fire. "I've kept emergency supplies," he explained, his deep voice calm and reassuring. "Some women from neighboring villages taught me which herbs help with milk production and infant strength." From another container, he produced a small amount of powdered formula. "This will give them immediate nourishment while the herbs help your body recover." Maria watched in amazement as the mountain man prepared the mixture with the precision of someone who had done this before. When it was ready, he showed her how to feed the babies using a clean cloth dipped in the solution. "Small amounts," he instructed. "Their bodies are tiny." The twins accepted the nourishment eagerly, their whimpers subsiding. Relief washed over Maria's face as she cradled them close. Robert settled beside her on a handcrafted wooden bench, the firelight casting shadows across his weathered features. "I once found a mother deer who couldn't feed her fawn," he began, his voice dropping to a gentle rumble. "The little one was nearly gone when I brought them both here. Used similar herbs, fed that fawn by hand for 2 weeks." He continued with stories of survival against impossible odds, of injured animals he'd nursed back to health, of his own struggles during his first brutal winter, alone in these mountains. "Nature tests us," he said, watching the now sleeping infants. "But it also provides what we need to endure." Maria studied his profile, seeing beyond the intimidating exterior that had kept villagers at bay for years. Here was a man who understood suffering, yet remained gentle, who lived apart from others, yet knew deeply how to nurture life. As the night deepened around the cabin, something shifted within her. The crushing weight of shame began to lift, replaced by a fragile but growing resolve. If this solitary man could carve out such compassion from hardship, perhaps she too could forge strength from her broken pieces. "Thank you," she whispered, her voice steadier than before. Robert simply nodded, his presence beside her more comforting than any words could be. "Watch your fingers," Robert Smith cautioned as he guided Maria's hands around the rough bark. "Pine splits easier than oak, but the sap can be sticky." The morning sun filtered through the forest canopy as they gathered firewood together. Maria Johnson's bruises were fading, but the emotional wounds from her village exile still ran deep. Each day in the mountain man's cabin brought new lessons in survival. "My father never taught me these things," Maria admitted, carefully stacking kindling in her arms. "He believed women should stay inside." Robert nodded thoughtfully. "Out here, everyone needs to know how to survive." His voice was gentle but firm, like his calloused hands that demonstrated each skill with practiced ease. Over the next several days, the wilderness became Maria's classroom. Robert showed her which mushrooms were safe to eat and which berries would poison her daughters. He taught her to identify animal tracks, to listen for approaching predators, and to set simple snares for rabbits. "The trap doesn't need to be complicated," he explained, bending flexible branches into position. "Nature provides everything we need if we know where to look." Maria absorbed each lesson eagerly. When she successfully identified yarrow for medicinal use, Robert's approving nod filled her with unexpected pride. When she managed to start a fire using only flint and dried moss, her confidence surged like the flames she'd created. One evening, as her twins slept peacefully by the hearth, Maria realized she hadn't thought about the villagers' cruel words all day. The shame that had once consumed her was being replaced by something stronger: self-reliance. "Do you think I could hunt?" she asked Robert suddenly. He looked up from carving a small wooden toy for one of the babies. "I don't see why not. Your hands are steady, and your eyes are sharp." "The village elders would say it's not a woman's place." Robert set down his knife. "The village elders aren't here, and they were wrong about many things." That night, as Maria checked on her sleeping daughters, she felt a profound shift within herself. The mountain man had given her more than shelter. He'd shown her a path to independence. "Tomorrow," she whispered to her twins, "I'll learn to protect you both. No one will ever hurt us again." Outside, an owl called into the darkness. Maria no longer flinched at the sound. A forest that had once seemed threatening now felt like a shield between her new family and the world that had rejected them. With each skill she mastered, the cabin felt less like a temporary refuge and more like home. The frost-tinged morning air carried a warning that Robert Smith noticed immediately. Fresh wolf tracks circled the clearing around the cabin, their distinctive paw prints pressed into the soft earth. The mountain man had lived in these woods long enough to read the signs. A pack was growing desperate as winter approached. "Maria," he called softly, not wanting to frighten her, "come see this." Maria Johnson stepped outside, pulling her worn shawl tighter around her shoulders. Her face paled as she recognized the tracks. "The wolves, they're getting closer," she whispered, instinctively glancing back toward the cabin where her twin daughters slept. Robert nodded gravely. "They're hungry, but we won't panic. Today, I'll teach you how to protect your home." Instead of sending her inside, he involved her in the preparations. Together, they gathered branches and fashioned simple warning systems, arrangements of sticks and stones that would clatter if disturbed. Robert showed Maria how to secure the wooden shutters with additional braces he'd crafted from sturdy oak. "These won't stop them completely," he explained, demonstrating how to wedge a thick plank across the door, "but they'll give us time to respond." As they worked, Maria's initial fear transformed into focused determination. She suggested placing buckets of water near each window, something she'd once seen used to deter wild dogs in the village. "Smart thinking," Robert praised, his weathered face breaking into a rare smile. "You're learning quickly." That night, the howls began, first distant, then alarmingly close. Maria clutched her daughters to her chest, her heart pounding. Robert lit torches and positioned them around the cabin's perimeter, explaining that wolves feared fire. "Stay calm," he instructed, handing her a sturdy walking stick. "They sense fear." Near midnight, the warning traps clattered. Through the narrow gaps in the shutters, they spotted the wolves, 5 of them, their eyes reflecting the torchlight like eerie lanterns in the darkness. When one wolf began scratching at the door, Robert and Maria moved as one. He flung the door open just enough for them both to thrust burning branches outward, shouting and creating a wall of noise and flame. The startled pack retreated several yards, circling warily. For 3 hours, they maintained their defense, Maria growing more confident with each confrontation. By dawn, the pack had disappeared back into the forest. Exhausted but triumphant, Maria sank onto a chair, her daughters finally sleeping peacefully. "We did it," she whispered, a new understanding dawning in her eyes. Robert nodded. "Together." In that moment, Maria realized something profound. The greatest dangers could be faced when trust replaced fear. The mountain man had shown her not just how to defend against wolves, but how courage, shared between 2 people, could become something powerful enough to keep the darkness at bay. The wolves had retreated into the darkness, their howls fading into the night. Maria Johnson sat by the hearth, her hands still trembling slightly as she wrapped a woolen blanket tighter around her shoulders. The fear that had gripped her during the attack lingered, but something else burned brighter within her: pride. "You were remarkable out there," Robert said, stoking the fire. His weathered face caught the golden light as he glanced at her. "Most people freeze their first time facing wolves. You didn't." Maria smiled faintly, watching as he prepared a celebratory meal from their modest stores. The mountain man moved with practiced efficiency, combining wild berries they'd gathered earlier that week with roots he'd roasted to perfection. "I was terrified," she admitted, "but all I could think about was protecting the girls." Robert nodded, understanding in his eyes. That's real courage, acting despite fear, not in its absence. The simple feast he laid out between them seemed like a banquet after the adrenaline of the night. Maria savored each bite, the sweet tart berries bursting with flavor against the earthy richness of the roots. They ate in comfortable silence, the crackling fire and occasional soft coos from the sleeping twins providing all the conversation they needed. "I never imagined I could face something like that," Maria finally said, setting aside her wooden bowl. "Back in the village, I was always—" She trailed off, searching for the right word. "Protected? Confined?" Robert offered. "Diminished," she decided. "I was taught to be small, to accept whatever came without question." He studied her thoughtfully. "And now? Now I know I can fight back. I can protect what matters." Later, as Robert cleaned up their meal, Maria crept to the corner where her daughters slept peacefully in their makeshift cradle. Their tiny faces, so alike yet subtly different, were relaxed in slumber, unaware of the danger that had threatened their home or the courage their mother had discovered. Maria gently stroked each downy head, marveling at how these two small lives had completely transformed her own. Just weeks ago, she had been beaten and abandoned for bringing them into the world. Now, she was learning to hunt, to gather, to defend, to truly live rather than merely exist. She realized with startling clarity that she was no longer just surviving day to day. The constant fear that had been her companion since the twins' birth was receding, replaced by a growing confidence in her own abilities and Robert's steadfast support. For the first time since fleeing the village, Maria allowed herself to imagine a future, not just for tomorrow or next week, but for years to come. She was beginning to thrive. Maria Johnson ventured deeper into the forest than she had dared before, following the gentle sound of running water. Robert had taught her to listen for the river's voice, a skill she was slowly mastering. The twins were sleeping peacefully back at the cabin, under Robert's watchful eye, giving her a rare moment of solitude. The morning sunlight filtered through the canopy, dappling the forest floor with golden patches. As she rounded a moss-covered boulder, Maria gasped. Before her lay a hidden grove, nestled against the riverbank, bursting with wild blackberries and a variety of herbs she recognized from Robert's teachings. "This is perfect," she whispered, kneeling beside a patch of yarrow. Her fingers traced the feathery leaves, remembering how the mountain man had shown her its healing properties for cuts and bruises. Nearby grew chamomile and mint, their familiar scents bringing comfort and memories of the teas he'd brewed during her recovery. Maria gathered her skirt to form a makeshift basket, carefully selecting the ripest berries and most vibrant herbs. Each plant she identified felt like a small triumph, evidence of how much she had learned in these woods that once terrified her. The juice stained her fingers purple as she worked, a badge of her newfound knowledge. "The girls will love these," she thought, imagining their tiny faces lighting up at the sweet taste. Though they were still too young for solid food, preparing for their future filled her with purpose. Back at the cabin, Robert Smith looked up from cradling one of the twins as Maria entered with her bounty. His weathered face broke into a rare smile. "You found the grove," he observed, pride evident in his voice. "I remembered what you said about following the bend in the river," Maria replied, carefully laying out her harvest on the rough-hewn table. "There's so much more than I could carry." That afternoon she worked with newfound confidence, crushing berries for preserves and hanging herbs to dry from the cabin rafters. She prepared a simple stew, adding fresh herbs that filled the small space with earthy aromas. As she fed her daughters later that evening, Maria felt something unfamiliar bloom within her chest. Pride. Not the desperate pride of survival, but something deeper and more sustaining. Here, away from the judgment of Willow Creek Village, she was becoming someone new. "Tomorrow I'll show you how to make a tincture from the yarrow," Robert offered, stoking the fire as darkness fell. Maria nodded, watching her daughters drift to sleep. Each day brought new knowledge, new strength. The woman who had been thrown into the dirt for bearing twin girls instead of sons was fading away, replaced by someone who could provide, protect, and perhaps one day prosper. For the first time since fleeing the village, Maria truly believed she could shape her own destiny. Word of Maria Johnson's survival had crept back to Willow Creek Village like a persistent fog. At first, it was merely whispers between neighbors, how the disgraced mother and her twin girls had vanished into the forest with the mountain man. Soon, those whispers grew into heated discussions at the village square. "She's making a mockery of our traditions," Elder Thomas declared, pounding his walking stick against the dirt. "If she can defy us without consequence, what's to stop others from questioning our ways?" The village council gathered that evening, their faces illuminated by flickering torchlight. The decision was unanimous. Maria must be brought back to face judgment. 3 men were chosen as emissaries: Jacob, the blacksmith's son, Caleb, a hunter known for tracking skills, and Owen, the village constable. At dawn, the trio set out, following the winding path through the dense forest. The journey took most of the day, with only Robert's reputation as guidance. Locals spoke of his cabin in hushed tones, few having ever ventured close enough to see it. When they finally reached the clearing, they were surprised by what they found. The cabin stood sturdy and well-maintained, smoke curling from its chimney. A small garden had been planted nearby, and clean laundry hung on a line, signs of domestic stability they hadn't expected. Robert Smith emerged first, his imposing frame filling the doorway. Though he carried no weapon, his presence alone made the men hesitate. Behind him, Maria appeared, one daughter cradled in each arm. The young mother looked remarkably different, her posture straight, her eyes clear and confident. "We've come to bring you back," Owen announced, attempting authority despite his wavering voice. "The elders demand your return." Maria stepped forward, standing shoulder to shoulder with Robert. "I have nothing to return to," she replied, her voice steady. "My home is here now." Caleb stepped forward. "You can't just abandon your people. There are rules." "Rules that allowed me to be beaten in the dirt for giving birth to daughters?" Maria challenged. The twins stirred against her chest, and she soothed them with gentle words before continuing. "Look at my children. They're healthy. They're loved. Would that be true if we returned?" The emissaries exchanged uncomfortable glances. Jacob, who had witnessed Maria's treatment firsthand, couldn't meet her gaze. "The village has its ways," Owen insisted, though with less conviction. Robert remained silent throughout the exchange, his presence a solid wall of support behind Maria. When he finally spoke, his words were measured but firm. "She has made her choice, as have I." The three men stood their ground for several tense moments before finally retreating, the weight of their failed mission hanging heavy on their shoulders. As they disappeared into the trees, Maria released a breath she hadn't realized she was holding. For the first time since leaving the village, she truly believed in her right to choose her own path. The emissaries from Willow Creek Village shifted uncomfortably on the cabin's threshold, their confidence faltering as they faced Maria Johnson. The woman standing before them barely resembled the broken figure they'd last seen lying in the dirt. Her eyes, once downcast, now met theirs with unwavering resolve. "The elders demand your return," the lead messenger stated, though his voice lacked conviction. "This arrangement goes against our ways." Maria cradled one of her daughters against her chest, the infant's tiny fingers curled around her mother's thumb. "These are my children," she replied, her voice steady. "And this is our home now." Robert Smith stood silently beside her, his imposing frame filling the doorway. The mountain man's reputation preceded him. Stories of his strength, his knowledge of the wilderness, and his fierce sense of justice had circulated through the village for years. The messenger's eyes darted nervously to his weathered hands, capable hands that could snap branches as easily as twigs. "The village has laws," another emissary attempted, though he took an instinctive step backward when Robert crossed his arms. "Laws that allow beating a mother for bringing life into the world?" Robert finally spoke, his deep voice resonating through the small clearing. "I follow different laws, those of decency and compassion." The third messenger, younger than the others, couldn't help but stare at the transformation before him. The cabin, once a hermit's refuge, now showed signs of family life, urds drying from the rafters, small garments hanging near the fire, the soft sounds of another infant cooing from inside. "We won't return," Maria said simply. "Tell the elders we wish them well, but our path lies here." The emissaries exchanged glances, their mission suddenly seeming foolish. Without another word, they turned and disappeared into the forest, defeated not by threats or violence, but by the quiet certainty of a woman who had found her strength. When news reached Willow Creek, it spread like wildfire. The tale grew with each telling, how Maria stood tall, how the mountain man had created a sanctuary, how the twins were thriving far from the village's judgment. For the first time, hushed conversations questioned long-held beliefs. "Perhaps twins aren't cursed after all," whispered a young mother, watching her own daughter play. "If Maria can survive in the wilderness," mused another woman, whose bruises matched those Maria once bore. In kitchens and gardens, during washing and weaving, women exchanged glances heavy with unspoken thoughts. Maria's defiance became a pebble, creating ripples across the still waters of tradition. Without meaning to, she had planted seeds of doubt that would slowly, inevitably, bloom into change. Rain drummed steadily against the cabin's wooden roof as Maria Johnson rocked one of her daughters to sleep. The other twin had already drifted off, her tiny chest rising and falling beneath a handmade blanket. With both girls finally at rest, Maria found herself with a rare moment of solitude. Robert had gone to check his traps despite the downpour, leaving her alone with her thoughts. She moved about the cabin, tidying the modest space that had become home. While arranging some of Robert's belongings that had been displaced during their morning meal, her fingers brushed against something leather-bound and weathered beneath his sleeping pallet. Curiosity piqued, Maria gently pulled out what appeared to be an old journal, its cover cracked and worn from years of handling. She hesitated, knowing she might be intruding on the mountain man's privacy. Yet something compelled her to open it. Perhaps the desire to understand the quiet strength of the man who had saved her and her daughters. The pages were filled with Robert Smith's careful handwriting, documenting a life Maria had never imagined. He wrote of being orphaned at 9, forced to survive with an uncle who treated him with calculated cruelty. There were passages about sleeping in barns during winter, stealing food to survive, and eventually fleeing into the wilderness as a teenager. "I learned today that hunger feels different on the 3rd day," one entry read. "It becomes a hollow friend that walks beside you." Maria's eyes welled with tears as she read about Robert's first winter alone, how he'd nearly frozen to death before an elderly trapper found him and taught him the ways of survival. The journal chronicled loss after loss: the trapper's death, a dog companion taken by wolves, a cabin burned by lightning. Yet between these tragedies were moments of profound beauty, descriptions of sunrise over mountain peaks, the satisfaction of building his first successful shelter, the joy of nursing an injured fox kit back to health. When she heard Robert's footsteps approaching, Maria quickly returned the journal to its hiding place. She greeted him with new eyes, seeing beyond his imposing frame to the layers of pain and perseverance that had shaped him. That night, as they sat by the fire, Maria found herself studying his calloused hands, hands that had endured so much, yet remained gentle when cradling her daughters. She understood now that his strength wasn't innate, but forged through suffering. The realization settled in her heart. Resilience wasn't about avoiding pain, but transforming it into something useful, even beautiful. Robert caught her gaze and smiled questioningly. Maria simply smiled back, a silent acknowledgement passing between them. Two broken people, creating something whole. The first snow of winter blanketed the forest surrounding Robert Smith's cabin, transforming the landscape into a silent, white expanse. Inside, Maria Johnson huddled beneath layers of worn blankets, her body racked with violent shivers despite the roaring fire. The trauma of childbirth, followed by the village's brutal treatment and their forced escape, had finally caught up with her weakened immune system. "Your forehead's burning up," Robert murmured, his calloused hand gentle against her skin. The mountain man's eyes, usually stoic and measured, now betrayed genuine concern. He'd survived countless winters alone, but caring for a feverish woman and 2 newborns tested even his considerable skills. Maria drifted in and out of consciousness as the fever took hold. Through her delirium, she was vaguely aware of Robert moving purposefully around the cabin, gathering supplies and tending to her daughters. The twins, still so tiny and vulnerable, whimpered from their makeshift cradles nearby. "Stay with us," he urged, his voice a steady anchor as he pressed a cool cloth to her forehead. Robert worked methodically, drawing on knowledge accumulated through years of solitary survival. He crushed dried herbs from his winter stores, mixing them into poultices that he applied to Maria's chest and forehead. The earthy scent of medicinal plants filled the small cabin as he worked. Throughout the endless night, Robert refused to yield to exhaustion. When not tending to Maria, he fed the twins with the formula mixture he'd prepared, cradling each infant with surprising tenderness for hands so accustomed to rugged work. He whispered reassurances to them, promises that their mother would recover. "Your daughters need you," he told Maria, during her brief moments of lucidity, his voice firm but kind. "I need you to fight this." For 3 days, the battle against the fever continued. Robert barely slept, catching only moments of rest when absolutely necessary. He melted snow for fresh water, maintained the fire at perfect warmth, and continuously prepared fresh herbal remedies. His determination never wavered, even when Maria's condition seemed most dire. On the 4th morning, as pale winter light filtered through the cabin's small windows, Maria's fever finally broke. She opened her eyes to find Robert slumped in a chair beside her bed, his normally alert posture softened by exhaustion. The twins slept peacefully nearby, clean and well-fed despite the crisis. "You saved us," Maria whispered, her voice weak but clear. The mountain man stirred, relief washing over his weathered features. In that moment, something profound shifted between them, a bond forged in crisis and care, in vulnerability and strength. Maria felt gratitude bloom in her chest, warm and radiant, like sunshine breaking through winter clouds. For the first time since fleeing the village, she knew with absolute certainty that they would survive this new life together. The fever had been a shadow passing over Maria Johnson, threatening to steal her away from her daughters. As she regained strength, sitting wrapped in blankets by the cabin's hearth, she watched Robert moving about the small space with quiet efficiency. His large hands, so capable of surviving the harshest wilderness, had become instruments of healing, changing compresses, mixing herbal remedies, and cradling her twins with surprising gentleness when she could not. "You should have slept," Maria whispered, noticing the dark circles under his eyes. Robert looked up from where he was preparing a nourishing broth. "Couldn't," he said simply, "not until I knew you'd pull through." In those days of delirium, she had glimpsed something profound, his unwavering commitment not just to her survival, but to her dignity. While the village had cast her out for failing to produce a son, this man had risked everything to honor her daughters' lives and her own. "Why did you really take us in?" she asked, the question that had lingered since that first day. The mountain man paused, stirring the pot slowly. "Everyone deserves a chance," he said. "I know what it's like when no one stands up for you." Maria understood then that what bound them wasn't obligation or pity, but something far stronger. They had weathered the winter storms together, fought off wolves, and now defeated death itself. Their connection had transformed from rescuer and rescued into something balanced and true. That evening, as the twins slept peacefully in their makeshift cradles, Maria and Robert sat side by side, planning the spring garden. Their shoulders touched casually, comfortably, as they sketched planting rows in the dirt floor. "We'll need more space," Robert observed, "if we're to grow enough for all of us." "I can build a fence," Maria offered, surprising herself with her confidence. 6 months ago, she couldn't have imagined such self-reliance. He nodded, respect evident in his eyes. "I know you can." In that moment, Maria realized they had created something neither had possessed before. A family, chosen through shared hardship and mutual respect. Not bound by blood or village traditions, but by something far more resilient. Later, as moonlight filtered through the cabin's small window, Maria watched her daughters sleeping and felt a sense of belonging she'd never known in Willow Creek Village. Here, in this small clearing in the forest, they had built a home where her twins would grow up knowing their worth wasn't determined by their gender. "We're going to be all right," she whispered, more to herself than to Robert. He looked up from his whittling and nodded. "Better than all right," he said. "We're going to thrive." As winter's grit began to loosen, Maria Johnson found her strength returning. The color returned to her cheeks, and her movements grew more confident with each passing day. One crisp morning, while gathering kindling at the forest's edge, she spotted a figure hesitating among the trees. It was Sarah, a young mother from Willow Creek Village whose husband had recently cast her out for questioning the elders. "I heard you survived," Sarah whispered, her eyes darting nervously toward the cabin. "They say you've made a life here." Within days, 2 more women appeared, Eliza with her infant son, and Grace, whose bruises told a story Maria knew all too well. Word had spread through whispered conversations and furtive glances. The mountain man's cabin had become a beacon of possibility. Robert Smith watched this development with quiet approval. He cleared space in the cabin, built additional sleeping platforms, and taught the newcomers how to set snares for rabbits. "Everyone deserves safety," he said simply when Maria thanked him, his weathered face softening as he glanced at the twins, now plump and thriving under their care. Maria found herself sharing the lessons she'd learned: how to identify medicinal plants, preserve food, and keep warm through the coldest nights. Her hands, once soft from village life, were now calloused and capable. She demonstrated how to weave baskets from reeds by the river, a skill Robert had taught her during those first difficult weeks. "I never thought I could survive without the village," she told the women as they worked together. "But now I see that what they called weakness, our compassion, our questioning, is actually our strength." The women listened eagerly, their eyes reflecting a hunger for more than just physical safety. They craved the dignity Maria had found, the sense of purpose that radiated from her as she cared for her daughters and contributed to their small community. One evening, as they sat around the fire, Grace asked Maria how she had found the courage to refuse returning to the village when the emissaries came. "I realized I wasn't just protecting myself," Maria answered, watching her daughters sleep peacefully nearby. "I was showing my girls what it means to stand tall, even when the world tries to break you." Robert nodded from his place by the door, his silent presence a reminder of the unexpected alliance that had changed everything. The cabin, once a solitary man's refuge, now hummed with life and purpose, a testament to what could be built when judgment gave way to compassion. As the firelight danced across their faces, Maria recognized that her story had become something larger than herself. It had become hope. Robert Smith's once solitary cabin had transformed beyond recognition. What began as a simple refuge for Maria Johnson and her twin daughters now bustled with activity as women from Willow Creek Village arrived seeking sanctuary. The modest clearing surrounding the cabin expanded into carefully tended garden plots where vegetables thrived in neat rows. "Remember to leave the smaller berries. They'll grow larger by next week," Maria instructed a young mother who had arrived just days earlier, her own children playing nearby with the other youngsters. The woman nodded gratefully, her shoulders relaxed in a way they hadn't been when she first emerged from the forest path. Each morning, the growing community divided tasks naturally. Some women ventured into the woods to gather medicinal herbs Maria had taught them to identify, while others repaired structures or prepared communal meals. The mountain man worked alongside them, teaching hunting techniques and showing the older children how to set harmless warning traps around the perimeter. "You've created something remarkable here," Robert told Maria one evening as they watched the twins crawl determinedly across a blanket spread near the fire. The babies, now thriving and curious, reached for everything within grasp. Maria smiled, the confidence in her eyes a stark contrast to the broken woman he'd carried from the village months ago. "We created this together," she corrected him. "I simply showed them what you showed me, that kindness doesn't make you weak." The cabin itself had expanded with additional sleeping quarters built from forest materials. What began as emergency shelters evolved into permanent structures arranged in a protective circle. At the center, a communal fire pit served as both kitchen and gathering place where stories were shared each evening. Maria's leadership style emerged naturally from her experiences. She never commanded. Instead, she demonstrated. When conflicts arose, she listened before speaking, remembering how it felt to be silenced. The women responded to this approach, their trust in her growing with each passing day. "We aren't just surviving anymore," one woman remarked during a community meal. "We're living." Robert observed from the edge of the gathering, his quiet pride evident as he watched Maria teach another woman how to properly wrap a sprained ankle. The mountain man who had once valued solitude above all else now found purpose in this makeshift family, bound not by blood, but by choice. Together, they had created something the village elders never understood, a community where strength came from supporting one another rather than enforcing rigid traditions. And at its heart stood Maria, once deemed worthless for bearing daughters, now leading with the very compassion the village had denied her. In the great hall of Willow Creek Village, Elder Thomas pounded his fist against the wooden table, his face flushed with anger. The Council of Elders sat in uncomfortable silence as he ranted about the growing exodus of women to the mountain. "4 more families gone this week alone," he bellowed. "This defiance cannot stand." Elder Sarah, the only woman among the village leaders, studied her weathered hands before speaking. "Perhaps we should ask why they leave, rather than how to force them back." The suggestion hung in the air like smoke, unwelcome, yet impossible to wave away. For generations, the elders had governed through tradition and fear, but Maria Johnson's departure had created hairline fractures in their authority that were slowly spreading into cracks. In the marketplace, whispers traveled between stalls. Women exchanged glances when speaking of the mountain community. Some described it as a place of witchcraft and sin, but others, those whose sisters or daughters had fled, spoken of freedom, of shared work and protection. "My cousin visited them," a young mother murmured while selecting vegetables. "She says the twins are thriving, growing strong under both Maria and the mountain man's care." Robert Smith's name still evoked fear among many villagers, but increasingly, it also carried notes of respect. Stories circulated about how he taught the women to defend themselves, how he showed equal regard for all children, regardless of gender. Meanwhile, the village economy suffered. With fewer hands to work the fields and tend the livestock, harvests diminished. The remaining men found themselves taking on tasks previously assigned to women, causing resentment, but also a grudging appreciation for the labor they had taken for granted. Elder Thomas proposed a raid to bring the women back by force, but his suggestion met unexpected resistance. "And make enemies of our own daughters?" asked a father whose only child had left for the mountain 3 weeks prior. "I miss her, but she writes to tell me she's happier there. What right have we to drag her back?" Such questions would have been unthinkable months ago. Now they sparked heated debates in homes and taverns throughout Willow Creek. The most significant change came when Elder Sarah visited the mountain community herself. Upon her return, she spoke of organization, of children learning both survival and compassion, of women making decisions alongside men. "They haven't rejected all our ways," she reported to the council. "They've simply removed the cruelty from them." Maria's quiet revolution had accomplished what no armed rebellion could. It had forced the village to examine its heart. Some clung desperately to tradition, but others began to question whether their customs served the community or merely those in power. The seeds of change once planted proved impossible to uproot. The twins had grown remarkably in the months since their arrival at the cabin. Now able to sit up on their own, they babbled excitedly whenever Maria Johnson took them outside, their tiny hands reaching for passing butterflies and dancing leaves. The forest, that had once seemed so threatening to Maria, now felt like an extension of their home, a classroom without walls, where her daughters could learn life's most important lessons. "Listen," Maria would whisper, holding a finger to her lips, as a thrush sang from a nearby branch. "Each bird has its own special song." The girls would grow quiet, their eyes wide with wonder as they absorbed the sounds of the wilderness. These moments filled Maria with a profound sense of peace she'd never known in the village. Robert watched from a distance as Maria guided her daughters through a patch of wildflowers, naming each bloom and explaining which ones could heal and which were just for beauty. Her knowledge had expanded exponentially since those first frightening days. The woman who had arrived broken and defeated now moved with confidence through the forest, her shoulders straight, her steps sure. "They're getting stronger every day," Robert remarked one evening as they sat by the fire, the twins sleeping peacefully nearby. "Just like their mother." Maria smiled, the firelight softening her features. "I never thought I'd be teaching anyone anything. In the village I was just—" She paused, searching for words. "Someone to be controlled." Robert finished. Not anymore. The mountain man had kept his promise in ways neither of them had anticipated. Beyond providing shelter and protection, he had created space for Maria to discover her own strength. He taught her daughters to recognize animal tracks and which berries were safe to eat. But more importantly, he showed them what respect looked like, how a man could be powerful without being cruel. "Today, I showed them how to find north using the moss on trees," Maria said, pride evident in her voice. "Next week, I think they're ready to learn about the healing herbs in the grove." Robert nodded, his usually stern expression softening. "You've become quite the teacher." What neither said aloud, but both understood, was that their unusual family had healed something in each of them. For Maria, it was her sense of worth. For Robert, it was the loneliness that had shadowed him for years. And for the twins, growing up with two fierce protectors meant they would never know the shame their mother had endured. As the fire crackled and night settled around the cabin, Robert realized he had gained far more than he had given. The promise he made that day in the village square had transformed not just Maria's life, but his own. 6 months had passed since Maria Johnson had been cast out from Willow Creek Village. Standing at the forest's edge with her twin daughters nestled against her chest, she watched the sun paint the valley in hues of amber and gold. The girls, now plump-cheeked and thriving, cooed softly as the morning breeze played with their dark curls. Maria inhaled deeply, savoring the scent of pine and wildflowers. The bruises that had once mapped her body had long faded, replaced by the strength that came from chopping wood, gathering food, and building shelter. Her hands, once soft and uncertain, now moved with purpose and confidence. "They're growing so fast," came Robert's deep voice as he joined her, his eyes crinkling with pride as he gazed at the twins. The mountain man had kept his promise, becoming more than just their protector. He was truly their father in every way that mattered. "Thanks to you," Maria replied, her voice steady and sure. "I never imagined we could build this life." Behind them, smoke curled from the chimneys of several cabins that now dotted the clearing. What had begun as a single refuge had blossomed into a sanctuary for those seeking escape from the village's rigid traditions. 5 women who had followed Maria's path gathered nearby, their children playing together in the dappled morning light. Their laughter echoed through the trees, a sound that had once been rare but now filled their days. "It wasn't me," Robert said, gently touching one of the twins' cheeks. "You showed them what courage looks like. I just provided the space." Maria smiled, remembering her first days in the forest, terrified, broken, barely clinging to hope. Now she stood tall, no longer fearing the judgment that had once crushed her spirit. The community they had built together was founded on acceptance rather than punishment, on support rather than shame. Sarah, one of the first women to join them, approached with a basket of freshly gathered berries. "The others are waiting to start the morning meal," she said, "and Eliza wants to show you the new traps she set by the eastern stream." Maria nodded, passing one of her daughters to Robert. The simple gesture spoke volumes about their partnership, equal, trusting, and strong. As they walked back toward the cabins, Maria glanced over her shoulder at the path leading down to Willow Creek. Once, that path had represented exile and loss. Now it was simply a road, one that could be traveled in either direction by those brave enough to choose their own way. In the heart of what had once been wilderness, they had created something precious, a family bound not by blood or tradition, but by choice and love. And that, Maria knew, was the greatest triumph of all. The story of Maria Johnson and Robert Smith spread through neighboring villages like wildfire. What began as whispers among women gathering water at the well grew into tales told around evening fires. Their journey from outcasts to community builders became a beacon of hope for those trapped in cycles of tradition and fear. 1 year after that fateful day, when Robert had carried Maria and her twin daughters from the dirt of Willow Creek Village, their makeshift family had blossomed beyond anything they could have imagined. The twins, now toddling with uncertain steps across the cabin floor, filled the mountain home with laughter that echoed through the trees. Maria watched them with quiet pride, remembering the broken woman she had once been. Her hands, once trembling and weak, now moved with confidence as she taught other women to identify medicinal plants and set traps for small game. The knowledge Robert had shared with her flowed through her to others, creating a current of self-reliance that could never be stemmed. "You've created something remarkable," Robert told her one evening, as they sat watching the sunset from the cabin porch. The mountain man's eyes, once guarded and distant, now held a warmth reserved for Maria and her daughters. "We created it together," she corrected him, reaching for his weathered hand. Their community had grown to include 15 women and their children, each with their own story of hardship overcome. Some had fled abuse, others rejection, but all found sanctuary in the principles Maria and Robert established. Everyone contributes, everyone protects, everyone belongs. Even Willow Creek Village had begun to change. The elders who had once cast Maria out now sent representatives to trade with the mountain community, their rigid stance softened by necessity and curiosity. Some of the younger men had abandoned old prejudices entirely, courting women from the mountain settlement with respect rather than entitlement. As the twins grew stronger each day, Maria realized they would never know the shame that had once defined her existence. Instead, they would inherit a legacy of resilience, learning from both their mother's compassion and Robert's quiet strength. "Family isn't always what you're born into," Maria often told newcomers seeking refuge. "Sometimes it's what you build when everything else falls apart." In the heart of the wilderness, surrounded by those who had chosen each other, Maria had discovered the most profound truth of all, that even the deepest wounds could heal with time and tenderness, and that love, freely given and received, could transform not just a life, but an entire community.